giving a bottle to the breastfed baby, which is not necessarily something that you have to do. If you're exclusively breastfeeding, you don't necessarily ever have to give your baby a bottle. But if you are looking to go out for an evening, or you've got to go back to work a bit earlier, this might be something that you're coming to face with, and it's not necessarily always an easy task. So in this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about the mechanism of feeding at the breast versus feeding with bottle. I'm going to talk a little bit about tips and tricks that you can do to encourage your baby to feed efficiently and effectively and comfortably without any fuss or minimal fuss using a bottle, and what kind of techniques might make this process a little bit more gentle. So my name is Kitty. I'm a hypnobirthing instructor, I'm a lactation consultant, an antenatal educator, I'm a birth and postpartum doula, as well as a registered general nurse. If you're interested in content relating to pregnancy, birth, breastfeeding, hypnobirthing, make sure and hit that little subscribe button down below, as well as the notification bell if you don't want to miss any more of my videos. Okay, so Atticus is asleep and I have preed myself up a little bit more, covered up that big old spot. Thank you, makeup. And I'm going to talk a little bit about giving a bottle to the breastfed baby. And I have to just put a bit of a disclaimer saying that not all breastfed babies will ever need to take a bottle. It's not necessary if you are exclusively breastfeeding for your baby to have a bottle. However, there may be instances where you have to leave your baby for a certain period of time, where your baby is going to be away from you while you have an appointment, or you have a dinner date, or you've got to go back to work a bit early, where your baby might want to take a bottle. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the different options there for different ages, and then the different mechanism behind breastfeeding versus bottle feeding, and some tips and tricks on how you can support the baby who is refusing a bottle. Okay, so let's begin with the mechanism behind feeding from a bottle versus feeding from the breast. So what many people don't realize is it's a completely different skill. It's not the same as just, well, putting it into their mouth and hoping that they will suckle and the milk will come. Babies who are feeding at the breast use their jaw and their chin and their tongue, using kind of a wave-like motion, sort of peristaltic motion, to transfer the milk from the breast. When they're feeding from a bottle, it's all in the cheeks, so they have to maintain a huge amount of suction to transfer the milk. So it's a new skill entirely. I'm going to work on a different position that might be a little bit more supportive for that a bit later on. But just to clarify initially, not all breastfed babies will need to take a bottle. Depending on the age of your baby, a cup or a little spoon might be sufficient. I'm going to link or put pictures of my two kind of favourite open cups, a doily cup or just a small and mini first cup is perfect. So I just wanted to start this little chat saying that not all breastfed babies will ever need to take a bottle. If you are exclusively breastfeeding your baby and there's no need for you to ever be separated from your baby, you don't necessarily have to get your baby to take a bottle. It's not necessarily something that you have to do. However, I do get a lot of questions from mums who are going back to work a bit earlier, or they want to have a night with their partner away from their baby, or going to the hairdressers and they can't bring their baby with them. So in that instance, a bottle can be the first port of call. I have to say that if your baby is over the age of 6 months, or in fact a bit younger than that, there's absolutely no reason why instead of taking a bottle, they can't drink from an open cup. So you can we just use shot glasses and egg cups in the beginning, and spoons, exactly the same mechanism, and they actually just lap it up like a little kitten. So I'll see whether I can get a video that might show that a little bit later on. However, if your baby is over the 6-month mark, it might not be worthwhile introducing a bottle at all. You might just go directly to a sippy cup. The doily cups are great, or just a little mini open cup. It's kind of like a medicine cup. I'll see whether I can actually get you one to show you one. Is a perfectly good example. However, if your baby is younger than that and you really do want to introduce a bottle, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the mechanism behind the feeding, as well as positions and tips and tricks that might be helpful for you to get your baby to take the bottle. So one of the biggest questions that I get in my preparing to breastfeed class, oftentimes from the mums, but also oftentimes from the partners, is when can we introduce a bottle? And I tend to err on the side of caution with this one. I very much think that breastfeeding is a skill just as much as bottle feeding is, and if that's something that you want to do, you want to make sure that you introduce it at a time that's not too late. So I always think, Okay, once you've got your breastfeeding down pat, you're talking about the kind of 5 to 6 week mark. And why is that? So I tend to say wait 5 to 6 weeks for your breastfeeding to become really well established, but also before you introduce. So ideally, if you're going to be introducing a bottle, you're going to be introducing a little bit of express breast milk. And if you are doing a bit of pumping before that period of time, you have the possibility of overstimulating your breasts and running into troubles with oversupply, risk of clogged ducts, mastitis, things like that. So all of those things that we want to avoid. As well as risking those factors, you're also risking your baby developing a preference for a maybe fast flowing teat as opposed to the feeding and the work that they have to do with the breast. So remembering that a baby at the breast has to do all of this work with his lovely orofacial muscles. They have to really transfer the milk using that wave-like motion and using the pressure with their chin and their jaw. Whereas a baby with a bottle, if it's a very fast flow bottle and you're not using a paced bottle feeding technique, which I will talk about in another video. I've actually got a very casual video on that over on my Instagram. I'll try and put a picture of it. It's very likely that your baby will develop a preference. So making sure that your breastfeeding is solid before you go introducing a bottle. So like that, I say around the 5 to 6 week mark. So the next question that I get is what sort of bottle is the ideal bottle for a breastfed baby? And the answer is there isn't really one in particular. While there are some that I really dislike, I really cannot stand those colic bottles, the ones with the like an extra, I'll try and put a picture here, the extra little like valve on the inside. Also the Medela Kama I find really annoying because you can't control the flow. So a baby at the breast, you might notice, they'll suck and then take a little pause, and that's them taking a break. And if you have a bottle that you can't control the flow of, the baby's not getting an opportunity to take a breather. So unless you have an extremely fast flow and that your baby's really well able to accommodate that, I tend to go for a slower flow teat, and you want it to match as closely as possible your nipple to the teat of the bottle. As well as that, the flow, if you have a fast flow, you might go for a slightly faster flow. If you've got a regular flow, going for a slow flow or so the size 0 teat. So the biggest question that I get is what sort of bottle teat is the ideal one for a breastfed baby when you're giving them a bottle? And the answer is there isn't really one. And while there's definitely a few bottles that I really dislike, which I might cover if you have any questions later on, I really don't think that there's one bottle fits all. I think ideally you're looking at pairing the flow of your milk and the size and shape of your own nipple to that of the bottle that you're going to give your baby. So ideally, if you have sort of a flatter nipple, you're going for sort of a flatter, less shouldered bottle. Whereas if you have more protruding nipples, you might go for one with a little bit more shouldering, which is that kind of that has more of a curve, more of an indent. Remembering though that the shape that your nipple makes in baby's mouth is quite elongated. So unless your baby is particularly small, going for a slightly longer teat might actually suit your baby. Sometimes a bit of trial and error is what works best. So my first tip is going to be a little bit controversial, and that is for the first bottle for mum to try and give it. So a lot of times I hear get mum to leave the house and get out of the room, it's got to be somebody else. My suggestion would be that they trust you most. They trust their mum most. That is where their source of food comes from. So for mum to try and give that first bottle with loads of cuddles, reassurance and eye contact is going to be a much more comfortable experience both for you and for baby. The next tip then is to not force it. Give it plenty of time. Allow your baby to play with the bottle. Allow them to hold it. Allow them to chew on the teat. Try and make it a time that's not going to be associated with sort of negative connotations. You don't want your baby to associate feeding with the bottle being a negative time in their day. You want to have continuity, so you want to be trying and persevering with it at least once a day and making sure that it's surrounded by loads of eye contact, loads of fun time, loads of playtime, and it's not something where the baby absolutely has to take a bottle. My next tip would be to not expect your baby to take massive volumes. So again, coming back to this paced feeding technique, your baby is not going to down an entire bottle in one go. Consider it more of a meal and an experience as opposed to expecting them to take a full 40 mils in one sitting. Just in the same way that they don't necessarily always have a huge feed at the breast, they're not necessarily always going to have a huge feed with a bottle, particularly not in the early days. You're talking about very, very small quantities in the very beginning. So my next tip then is distraction, and this is very much a fine line, and it of course is not, your baby's not going to be expected to have a large quantity of milk if their siblings are playing in front of them and there's the TV going and the music going. However, if you have your baby maybe using sort of rocking motion at the same time, so you're rocking your baby in your arms, or you've got them forward facing in the carrier and they're looking out while you're going for a little walk around the kitchen, they might actually take a bottle really nicely for you. So it's about getting that balance right, but distraction can work really. My next tip then is to not wait until your baby is really hungry. So perhaps allowing them to have almost a full feed at the breast first, or waiting maybe 10 to 15 minutes after that feed, and if they're still nice and alert and they're happy and they're content, allowing them to play with the bottle, allowing them to try and get a little bit of milk from the bottle, and just to understand that how that mechanism works can be a really nice way to approach it. You do not want to be waiting until your baby is monstrously hungry to then try and get them to take a bottle of milk, because that is when they're going to be upset, they're going to be angry, they're just going to want the milk now. They're not going to be willing to try and learn this new skill. So waiting until they are comfortable, happy, hungry, but not too hungry. My next tip then would be to look at how warm the milk is. So you would be surprised to note exactly how warm the milk is when it comes from the breast. So you might find that warming up both the teat of the bottle, so running under some warm water first, as well as having the milk in the bottle quite warm, can really make a difference to whether or not your baby wants to take it. Some babies will quite happily take sort of warm room temperature milk, and that's absolutely fine, but for those first few bottles you might find it beneficial just to heat up the milk. So I've just dashed out to the car to see, can I get you examples of other bottles that you could use. And honestly, little medicine cup, so you can buy cups specifically for this purpose, but once it doesn't have a sharp edge on it, it's a nice rounded surface, so it's not going to cut them or dig into them. You can sit your little baby up on your lap, either forward facing or snuggled into the crook of your arm once they're reasonably upright, and what you're doing is you're tilting the cup so it's just touching their lips. So you don't want to be pouring it into them. In fact, it works if it's kind of got a smaller volume in it as opposed to a larger volume, and what you're doing is you're tilting the cup up to meet their lips, and baby will lap it up like a little kitten. So that is cup feeding, and I'll see, can I link kind of some of the other cups that I find really, really useful. After that, now we went to the beach relatively recently ago, so it's a little bit sandy, but something like this, it's a free flow cup, and they've got loads of control then, so they quite enjoy that too. So this is Atticus's little one that he uses at the moment. So this last little tip is going to be about supportive, as in hands-on supportive measures that you can use to encourage your baby to understand the mechanism of using their cheeks and increased suction and vacuum, creating a vacuum there to transfer the milk, as opposed to the peristaltic wave-like motion and using their chin and jaw that they would use at the breast. So I'm joined by my little baby here. And you can either have your baby facing outward and using your sort of distraction method as well, or you might find actually having them sort of snuggled up in the crook of your arm is just perfect in creating some eye contact and snuggles and all of the lovely things that they would get at the breast. So I've got here a very sort of long teat. It is not latex, it's not ideal, but it is a slow flow teat. So what you're going to be doing is encouraging your baby to open their mouth just in the same way they would at the breast. So you're sort of tipping the teat to just touching their lips, waiting for that big open mouth that they would at the breast. When they do that big open mouth action, you are inserting the teat just until about there. So if you have it too far into their mouth when they're very small, they can have that kind of, their gag reflexes really far forward, and you can encourage them to gag instead of to take the milk. So this is the third time I filmed this because I keep going over the minute mark. This is going to be about supportive hands-on measures that you can use to encourage your baby to use their cheeks to create that vacuum and suction to draw the milk through, as opposed to using their jaw and their chin to transfer the milk like they would at the breast. So you can either have your baby facing out like this and use your distraction method at the same time, or you can have your baby snuggled in here just so long as they're in that sort of almost upright position. So in the same way that you would if they were going to be coming feeding at the breast, you were going to be waiting for that big open mouth. So you're sort of teasing baby to open their mouth, touching the teat just off their lips, waiting for the big open mouth, and then as they attach onto the teat, you're going to only encourage them to take a bite up until there. Any more than that, baby's gag reflex is really far forward in the beginning, so you don't want them to be gagging on the bottle. So when you have them in a sort of upright position, and then you're giving them the bottle, what you want to do is you support their cheeks as they're feeding. So you can have their cheeks sort of supporting them here. So as baby's feeding here, you see a finger on either side supporting their cheeks, encouraging them and reminding them to use their cheeks to transfer the milk. So that little gentle, very gentle, you don't want to be hurting their cheeks, gentle pressure can encourage them and remind them to use their cheeks as opposed to their jaw, and encourage them to feed from the bottle.